Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Pianist Academy and another Q&A and Masterclass live stream. Woohoo! Welcome to everybody. I see we already have a bunch of people here. Hello to Sparrowhawk and Bunny Hollow. Well, I'll try to remember your real name, Sparrowhawk Thea. Bunny, Becky. Thanks for putting those in the chat. And Antonio's here as well. Nelba, hello, Nelba from Canada. Awesome. Yeah, but Becky, finally at the beginning. Awesome. Dith, beautiful. Great to see Dith again. And Jose, awesome. Great to see you, Jose. And Ser Woolsley. Woohoo, Ser Woolsley's here. We're going to kick off today's stream with a clip of Ser Woolsley playing. He's been working on Brahms Opus 117, number 1. So I think we're going to jump right into that. He's been preparing the repeat of the A section, or the last page of the intermezzo. So we'll take a listen to Ser Woolsley playing, and then we'll open it up for Q&A after we finish that little bit up. But hello to everybody. Hello, Dale. Hello. Awesome. Let me just cue up everything here, and we'll jump into Ser Woolsley's playing. By the way, while I do that, because I know, Ser Woolsley, you've submitted a lot of stuff, and Antonio, you have as well. And I encourage everybody to, you can always submit a video for some feedback. Just follow the directions in the description below the video. Does anybody get nervous when you do this stuff? I'm curious. So give me just a second. I'm pulling up some sheet music here and getting Ser Woolsley's video queued up for us. Hello, Juan. Dith, you say you get nervous. Sparrow, you get nervous. Sparrow, Thea, I'm going to try to remember that. Ser Woolsley, oh yes, my heart's pounding. Well, hopefully this will be just super, super constructive and a great time for everybody. Antonia says no. Awesome, I'm glad to hear that. And Becky, keep the video rolling and soon you'll forget about it. Your phone will be overloaded. If you do a lot of practicing with video, that actually might be true. All right, let's jump over. Ser Woolsley jumps right into the last bit of the A section in this video. So we're going to jump kind of into the middle of the piece here, and we'll go from there. Awesome. All right, beautiful, Ser Woolsley. Nice job. Let's give Ser Woolsley a little bit of round of applause in the chat. Great stuff, great stuff. So in Ser Woolsley's email to me, he said that he's been learning this all on his own without the help of his teacher, which he usually has throughout the year. Awesome. Yes, lots of great comments coming in. And Bunny, especially impressive from memory. Yes, it's always impressive, Ser Woolsley. You memorize things right away. So, Ser Woolsley, I know you had a couple questions for me, so I'm going to address those first and then maybe have another couple comments for you. So, let's jump into your first question for me was about the transition of the melody from the right hand to the left hand. So, here we go. I think, yeah, we can see that. So, at the beginning of this A section, we have the melody in the right hand here, and then it transitions down to the left. And you said that's causing you some trouble. Rightly so. That's a difficult thing to accomplish. So, first thing, Ser Woolsley, first thing that I would suggest practicing when we're going through sections, those melody lines, just take the melody itself, and hopefully, sometimes I know when we memorize really early, a lot of our muscle memory is linked together, and it can be difficult to break that and to separate it into different lines. But it would be super, super important. Can you play and practice the right hand without the first left hand chord, just the right hand into the left hand, and feel only the transition there. So, because even without everything else to think about, that's not the easiest thing to do, right? And if we're doing a great job in voicing up the uppermost note, let's say when we begin the right hand, right? When we voice that up and we transition hands, we have to voice up the left hand thumb to match. So, you could even break it down further and take the fingers that we use for the melody itself and just play those. So 5, 5, 1, 1. And transition them through the hands, right? So, Ser Woolsley, you're laughing. Are you laughing at what? Is this going to be hard, or are you laughing at a comment? just so I know. And I'm remembering to drink my coffee this morning. So, okay, we can break that down. Transition the melody with just the fingers that play it alone. Oh, and Antonio, okay. So just the tops, then play the entire chords. But keep it that simple, right? We can go to the next, the next line, we don't have to do it again. But a couple bars later, it's very similar. We just have a little pickup that leads into this bar. So isolate those and just practice that transition from right hand to left hand. The next step after that would be, can you add in purely only the left hand chord that begins the bar, and then continue the transition without re-engaging the right hand, right? The right hand has to go up. I'll put this back on the screen for everybody. After the first, this first transition of melody, the right hand's supposed to come up, right? So still leave that out. So if we say like this is 1, whoops, here we go. That's 1. 2 would be adding this chord in. 3, after we get that, then we can start to put these back in. That would be our third step. So 1, just the melody. 2, melody with the opening left-hand chord to give us some foundation. But still don't play the other right-hand chords. And then when that's comfortable, okay, oh, actually, let's make a 3, like a 3A and a 3B. So 3A, the right hand's going to get ready to play the upper notes, but it's not actually going to play them. So I'm still moving the hand where it'll have to be, but I don't have to worry about engaging them and voicing them in the correct way, right? I don't have to worry about this being voiced and then the next thing being so soft. But I'm still practicing the movement of the hand to the next notes that we need to make. And if you have a pedal there, go ahead and pedal there. If you don't, that's fine too, yeah? Then 3B, the final step, is putting it all together and actually playing all of the pitches. That still doesn't make articulating the difference in dynamic between the two right-hand notes, that doesn't make that easier, but it does help us really connect the melody line, which is the most important thing. As a separate thing, just an aside to practice, you could simply say, let's just play the right hand alone, and we're going to imagine hearing what the melody continues, how the melody continues in the left, and voice these up the way they should be, and then voice dramatically down those. We could even sing the melody while we play it and go, ba-da-da-da. So my ear is still engaged with where the melody should be, but then I'm also still practicing the physical articulation of bringing this out and this not. Right? So if we kind of boil all of those steps down, we're really trying to break down the difficult bit of this measure, and the measure is like this, into their primary components, right? So take the melody alone by itself. We have a little bit here in that bar, the next bar. So we would practice that. Yeah. So Ser Woolsley, does this seem like a possibility, and have you done it before? Has this been part of your practice or not yet? Because, yeah, like I said, the memory stuff, it might take a little bit of extra practice just to get our hands under us, so that you might have to spot the opening chord if you're not reading the music at all. You might have to do a little spotting of the two hands together to trigger their muscle memory, but then once you've kind of analyzed that one bar at a time, try to get rid of those other chords and just do the focus on this stuff. Yeah. So still waiting to see what Ser Woolsley says about that. By the way, hello Haydar. I haven't seen you in a while. Ser Woolsley, you said tried to do something similar at the beginning, but then you started practicing the other hardest parts. Yes. So go back to this kind of work and see if you can divide it into all of those different steps if possible. That's always how I suggest any piece. There's a lot of pieces in the rep where melody transitions between the hands. That's always the best thing to do. Isolate it and play the melody by itself first. And make sure without the other stuff around it that we're still using the same fingers and the same articulation, the same hand position as we would when we add everything back in. So we don't want to accidentally, especially, we don't have it in this piece, but especially if you just have a single line, one note melody, no chords, no harmony around it, but a single line that transitions between hands, it can be easy to forget. We need to play that line with the same fingers that we will be executing it with, when the rest of the music is happening. And sometimes we can say, oh, I'm just going to play, use all the fingers that I have and let it transition. And that's not going to tie back in together real well when we need to put it back together. All right. So, Ser Woolsley, your next question. Your next question was about fingering, in particular, in the fingering you were using in this little bit that I've kind of bracketed in blue. And yes, Haydar, this is Brahms Opus 117, number 1, one of the intermezzi. So, Ser Woolsley, the fingering in this bit that I've bracketed here, starting here, I think you're doing a great job choosing those fingers. We don't have a great deal many choices. We have to play 2 and 1 on the bottom of all these lines. Really, for just about everything. The tops, you're doing a great job playing those with 5 and 4, and sometimes 5 and 3 when the chord necessitates that, right? The one thing that you might consider, what you're doing here in this bar and on these 16ths, it's not bad by any means. It's one of the good choices. I'd say we have a second good choice. And I think right now what you're doing is you're playing 5 on the top and 4, and then crossing 5 over 4 here. Yeah. I believe that's what you're doing. So another choice, and it kind of depends a little bit on the pedaling that you'd like to use. If you want to pedal every one of the 16ths, which could be a good choice. Yeah, 5/4, there it is. When we do pedal each one of those 16ths, this allows for a great legato connection. That's really nice. Because we truly can hold on to the top and make sure that it's nice and smooth. But another choice, especially if you're not going to change pedal on both 16ths, if we're going to have the pedal down and change every let's say, 8th note. So those 2 16ths would get blurred then. Yeah, so okay, Ser Woolsley, you say you strive to pedal all, otherwise it gets too muddy. Sure. In that case, keep the fingering that you have. Right? But the other option, just to throw it out there in case you want to try it out, would be simply jumping 5/5 down here. Including here. That's how my hand tends to want to play this. And it still is even possible to fully connect them with pedal and make it beautiful legato, playing 5/5/5. So you don't have to pick one for the sake of legato and one not, right? But it does make the pedaling a little bit more tricky to use 5/5/5. The pedaling really has to be spot on. And I saw a comment from Josip you can, oh yeah, you just said what I was saying. You can use all 5s, but with half pedals. Yes, absolutely. So, in fact, that's a full pedal, but then yes, half pedal. So there's just the tiniest bit of blur that helps us connect those. But we can still use 5/5/5. That's not a necessity to change, Ser Woolsley, by any means. So if you already like your other fingering, great. It's just something to change up if you'd like to. Okay, I believe those were your questions for me that you emailed, and I have a couple other thoughts to share with you. If I missed one, can you remind me? And while I'm waiting for that, let me answer Nancy's question. Can you explain half pedals? So on an acoustic instrument and some digital instruments, half pedal is, well, let's say pedal in general is not just on and off, right? And sometimes we can tend to think about it that way. Sometimes the pedal, when it's down, the dampers are all lifted and the piano resonates. And when the pedal is up, the dampers are all on the strings, the piano doesn't resonate, right? But in actuality, the pedal has something like infinite gradations that you can lift it up and down. And the dampers inside the piano also follow that. They have seemingly an infinite number of places they can be lifted up and down, right? So when on a lot of acoustic pianos, when the dampers clear the strings, there can be a lot of play in the pedal left, right? So just because the pedal's all the way down doesn't mean that's the point where the dampers clear the strings and we get resonance or sustain. That usually happens somewhere in the middle of the pedal, somewhere part of the way down. On my particular piano, and I love pianos that are regulated like this, I don't have a camera to show my feet today, but the pedal completely clears the strings. The dampers clear the strings about 2/3 of the way down the pedal. I really like that. I find that it gives me a lot of control. Where half pedal comes in is the idea that we can place the dampers ever so gently on the strings while we play. So the strings are half sustained or they're half damped. Now that's simply breaking down pedal into now on, off, and half, right? So we can, that's the simplest way to put it, right? So if the pedal is somewhere in the middle, then we're going to find a place where the strings are partially resonating. They're not being dampened, right? that changes on every instrument. That changes from the lowest pitches to the highest pitches, how half pedaling works. But what's really important to know, and this goes kind of well beyond beginner pedaling, is that we're not only limited to full pedal, half pedal, and no pedal. There are plenty of places that we can flutter pedal or quarter pedal or three-quarter pedal or things like that. And all of that has to do with how we manipulate the dampers on the strings themselves in an acoustic instrument. Digital instruments, I know a lot of people that tune in here, they have digital instruments that they practice on. Some of the really nice digitals mimic half pedaling. They don't usually mimic like quarter pedaling and flutter pedaling very well. So we can still get some of that if you're practicing on a digital, but some of the really advanced techniques we're not going to be able to incorporate. And what Josip just said, let's see, it depends on the strings. Yes, absolutely. So when we sustain, this is one of the beautiful things about, especially if you have a 9-foot grand and the way some composers write music, we can have a big chord in the bass and other stuff here, and we can pedal so that we don't lose so much of the bass. But we can clear some of the upper notes, and that's exactly what Josip was just talking about. So we can sustain some of the really, really low, the fundamentals or roots of our chords or the lowest pitches, whatever those happen to be. We can get some extra oomph out of those and have them sustain through a phrase and provide that like pedal tone, if you will, but still keep the upper register clearer. And yes, like Josip said, that is pretty advanced. But thanks, Josip, for chiming in with all that stuff. You're absolutely spot on. So Nancy, I hope that answered your question. All right, let's go back. Sir Woolsley, you said that those were all of your questions about this piece, but let me dive in and share with you a couple other thoughts. And Kali, I'm going to come back to your question in just a second. Okay, so Sir Woolsley, I would continue to encourage you to look for places where you can relax the hand, where you don't have to sustain the quarter notes. I know I sound like a broken record talking about Brahms and relaxing, but where we don't have to actually hold the keys down because the pedal's doing its job, and give our hand some space to relax and come back. So let me try to find a couple for us. These are simple, but right at the beginning, the right-hand notes that aren't important, or that are kind of the chimes in the background here, they're not the melody, right? Those are great examples of the pedal's going to be taking care of a lot of this for us. So the hand can relax when we play those, and it can easily move around. Keep going. Oh, one thing. This wasn't where I was planning on going, but Sir Woolsley, your grace notes throughout. Do you have a reason you've chosen to play them where the grace note comes before the beat, rather than how this is typically performed, where the grace happens with the remaining chord underneath? This is played, there it is, with the D and the A flat, and then moves to the F. And that happens throughout the piece, right? And we have some further justification to play the grace notes like that at the very, very end. You'll see here, these are kind of like notated out movement the same way. Where the upper begins on the beat instead of prior to the beat. So I'm wondering if you have a reason why you're choosing that, because most pianists do not interpret the grace notes that way in this piece. Josip, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming in. So Sir Woolsley said it's just sentiment. Okay. So I would encourage you to continue to play around with that. Back on the first page too, where this theme begins. Play the G or the grace note with the beat, and then let it fall in. Okay, well, that's not exactly where I was going. But let's continue on. Okay, here in the second line. Second line of this piece, we have all these moving sixteenths. Right? This is, if we're really particular about the pedaling and we really keep it clean, we do need to hold these quarter notes as marked. We really need to hold them for as long as possible. There we go. Because a lot of this, the pedal is actually up through the phrase to keep it really clean. And the pedal is only being used to help connect where 5 and 1 have to lift and move, right? Even though that's happening, can we feel that we're not continuing to stretch really far? It looks like the hand is under a lot of tension when I see you play this line and a couple others. Like we're really, and some of our other fingers are kind of sticking up, which is giving it away, like 2, and there's a lot of finger lift happening sometimes. Like that. And with all that tension from the inner fingers, it makes me also think that we're continuing to push in with 5 and 1. Whereas, if we let 5 and 1 relax, and this is all very free, and it's really just enough arm weight, right, that the keys are staying down, then I can play all of the rest of this, and it's very easy. So something to try would be, when you play, let's say, the first notes of this bar here, when we play those, can your right hand continue to be free without, we're not going to play the rest of the 16ths yet, but can the hand continue to be free, and can the wrist move? Does the wrist have freedom? Is it relaxed? Can we even do a little lateral movement without losing connection with the keys, right? All of this. Especially though, can we move the wrist up and down and make sure that's free? And then you could go very slowly, one note at a time, through these 16ths. Make sure the wrist is staying supple and relaxed. Right? Okay. See, Ser Woolsley says those fingers are sticking up because the keys on the piano do not go up properly if you don't do that. Oh, man. Have you had a chance to ask your piano tuner or tech about that? Because we really don't want to practice a bad habit because of something, the instrument not behaving. So if the keys are a little sticky, that's something that they can fix. Try practicing this. If this octave is sticky, move it up an octave, shift yourself over and practice it on another part of the instrument to make sure that we're still using the proper technique. Because as soon as you either have that problem in the piano fixed or move over to another instrument, like when you go back to having lessons with your in-person teacher next month, all of what you've practiced in is going to be unnecessary movement on another instrument. You say because the other keys are blocking it. So yeah, the keys might be getting stuck to one another. The wood may be a little swollen, especially if it's humid where you are. Summertime, that happens a lot. So if that's happening, yeah, see what your technician can do about that. And you probably still have a digital. Go back and try it out on your digital keyboard where the keys and the action isn't going to change at all. And make sure that we're still dialing that in the right way. So you can still practice this wrist movement throughout all of this because we want to keep those octaves, even though they're sustained, we want to keep the mechanism very free. That really goes for the whole page, that part in particular. And my last comment for you, Ser Woolsley, and then we'll get into Q&A from everybody. when we get near the end of the piece. These measures where we have a couple different melodies happening. I just drew all over my music. Okay. So, once again, I would say, can we hear all of the different melodies happening simultaneously, or the two of them at least? Can we hear them, sorry, not simultaneously first, but individually first? Yeah? Do we know how the bottom line sounds? Including that note. And of course, then we would also play them with the correct hand and the correct fingering if possible. So a lot of the lower line is going to be 1 and 2. 1 jumping, 1 again, left hand transition, back to right hand. Do we really know those lines really well? And I'd encourage you not to rush this. Really dial into this marking from Brahms. Dolce is sweetly. I was close to being a decent performance. There can be some push and pull and some rubato, yes. But overall, let's make sure that it stays relaxed and calm and more like twinkly, sparkly, and less of like a thick strings that are, pushing through a phrase or something like that. Okay, cool. Does that all make sense, Ser Woolsley? Whew. Yes, and yes, you're right. This is definitely the most difficult page of the 3 in this intermezzo. But you say the last rolled chord is hard thanks to the hand position. So we have these, and then... Or are you talking about the big A flat chord that happens later in the piece? The very last rolled chord? That's another place where you can really think about keeping the hand relaxed, because I noticed in your video you were trying to grasp all of the notes of the A flat rolled chord before you played them. Okay, the first one. I'll come back to that in a sec. That last one, really, this is very slow. It says espressivo. The hand can be nice and fluid, and the roll can be slow. And let the forearm stay in alignment from 5 to 3 to 1 and up. Yeah? Josip, thanks for the question. I'm going to come back to that because I know I need to answer Kali's question from earlier. So, and yes, Ser Woolsley, the other, those are, they're not easy. Not easy. I'm using, I like to use, I think 3 on the first A flat here in the middle, and then 4 on the next chord. 4 in the middle. So 3 on A flat, and then 4 on G in the middle. All right. Let's give Ser Woolsley another round of applause. Really, really great work. There's a lot of musical stuff going on this page, so we talked a lot about technique. And you say, is it not a sforzando? I don't have an Urtext edition of this music, but I would not play a sforzando. Oh, there's a rinforzando on the A flat. There. That, put it in context, Ser Woolsley. It doesn't have to be it shouldn't be, I don't think, interpretively, a really sudden big moment of sound. That's completely out of context for the rest of the piece. And if Brahms writes espressivo, yes, it's written above the right hand, but this still isn't very large. I'm not playing It's not a big accent, and I'm not trying to roll the chord extremely fast as if it was something else, either another piece by Brahms or another composer. So bring it out, but we can still do it in a relaxed way with the mechanism. Yeah? Okay. Okay, great. Great. Awesome. And great comments, everybody. Thanks, Bunny and Sparrow, for saying that stuff. Becky and Thea. Okay, great. Let me go back up and answer some of these other questions that came in. So first, Kali's, and then we'll come back to Josep's question. By the way, we might have more or different people tuned in now than we had earlier. So we just listened to Ser Woolsley playing some Brahms. If you want to send anything in of yourself playing, any part, anywhere in your progress, the beginning, the middle, toward a performance, that's all fine. There are directions on how to send in a submission in the description of the video here. Okay, so Kali says, which fingers to use for arpeggios and the best way to practice two-handed arpeggios, I'm guessing. Gosh, Kali, most of those, if you have a score of scales and arpeggios, most people own the book of Hannon exercises, and half of the Hannon book is scales and arpeggios, and they have usually the best fingering suggestions. So right hand, we'll start with C major. The trouble, Kali, with answering your question quickly is that every key, a lot of the different keys have different fingerings. So the best place to look, oh, thank you, Ser Woolsley. Thanks so much for the super. I appreciate it. Kali, the best places to look are going to be in scores, pre-printed scores that have all of those fingering options listed for you. So Hannon, like I mentioned, is one that most people own. I'm not a big fan of the rest of the book, but it's a great resource to have your scales and arpeggios in it. So, for example, C major. Oh, you can't see that at all. I'll do it up an octave. How about that? C major, right hand, 1, 2, 3, usually 1, 2, 3, cross. We can keep going with that, right? Other keys, or, yeah, let's say, when we get into some of the more, dare I say, advanced, usually keys that don't happen as often, right? Like D flat, not as often, but later in our study, D flat. There are a lot of people that would play D flat major with the same fingering and cross, but you can also play starting with the second finger, cross to the thumb. So we start with 2 and put the thumb on a white key, following the same principles that we would in scale technique. The thumb stays off the black keys. And we can continue to follow that in E flat. These are all root position, obviously. When we get to G flat major, we really have to go back to, because the entire key is up and in the black keys, yeah? And left hand, let me see if there's a great way to show you left hand. Left hand. Whoa, I almost lost my mic. Let's not have that happen again. Here we go. So left hand from the bottom, 5 and C, 5, 3, 2, 1, crossover. Similarly, we can use 5 and D flat, or we can start with 3, 3, 1, 4, 2. If you'd like to keep it similar throughout all of your practice, you can start with 2. But the beginning and ending fingers don't always have to be the same in scales and in arpeggios as well. And then your other part of the question was how to practice with both hands together. I would resist studying arpeggios, both hands together and the cross, until we really have our parallel scales nice, in decent shape at least. So are we able to play parallel scales in, say, at least 2 octaves at a decent tempo, hands together? Yeah? And then when we get to that point, then I would say, okay, let's start to introduce some other arpeggios. In the meantime, if we just play 1 octave, That's going to be easier, much easier to put hands together. It's when we start to have to do the transitions that gets more complicated. So, Kali, did that answer your question? Do you have any follow-ups for me about that? Feel free to let me know in the chat, and I'll revisit that for you. Yeah, let me know, Kali. Bachward's fellow has tuned in. Hello. All right. So, okay, jumping back over, I'll jump back. Kali, if you chime in, I'll jump back to your question. But for now, let's go over to Josep's question. How do you explain depth of a key to a kid? And how do you explain that the note doesn't end when you just press the key? You always say that they need to play like the key ends on the floor. That's interesting. I like that concept. Gosh, yeah, there's I think how I would do this is I would use arm weight first to demonstrate this kind of thing. Whether that's a single note or even just like a fifth, if they play a fifth in C, and make sure that we feel, if we just drop into the keys, heck, we don't even have to play good sounding notes. Can we just drop in and now we're feeling the bottom of the key, but we're not pressing. And I think that's one thing that stuck out at me when we talk about like depth of key and going all the way to the bottom of the key. We want to do it without pressing or without continuing to press once we get there. And so that's the one thing I would worry about with the bottom of the key is on the floor, is that if we continue to press, we're going to be developing some not great technique in that process. So can we take just the hand without worrying about any notes and feel, I usually like a fifth, and most kids can do it, I think. Can we just play, feel how the fingers are, you could even, this is a little different than it used to be, but if the parents of the kids you teach and the kids themselves are okay with this, you can push while they're hanging here, like hanging, the only thing that's keeping their fingers on the key is the friction. Otherwise, the hand would just fall off. So they're just kind of hanging here. The wrist is super relaxed. Yeah. You can come back and you could push on the tops of their fingers and say, look, this is all the way at the bottom of the key. And then they can feel like nothing else is moving. And it doesn't take any effort to get there. We're not continuing to put effort into the system to play to the bottom of the key. Yeah. I think that's how I'd go about doing it. I haven't taught a young kid, a young student, like below the age of 15 in a long time. Gosh, it's been like probably 10 years. So yeah, most of my young students are teenage years. I'm trying to think of if there's anything else. Bachward's fellow, I know you teach a lot of children. Do you have anything to add to that? Yeah, I keep coming back to the feeling of just letting the hand fall. I'd resist probably, my mind, I'm just thinking out loud here. I think I'd resist the idea of making a fist and playing because we never use the hand in that orientation. And there's a great chance that kids won't respect how strong they are. So yeah. Heck, even have them, can they hold their hand up a couple inches, 3 or 4 inches off the keys, let it drop in and not worry about the pitch and play. And even can they wiggle a little bit? Can they feel that? They're all the way down at the bottom. Yeah. So Josip, give that a try and see if that helps. And then if it, I'd love to hear if it does, and if it doesn't, always come back and tell me that it didn't work. Great. So let me see. I saw Kali wrote back in. Okay, follow up about these arpeggios. Kali says, do I use a sustain pedal when moving from one octave to the other? Because it always sounds like you're playing them in triplets. So yes, a standard triad arpeggio is going to be in triplets. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And if we can play 3 octaves, that'll work out beautifully. I would practice both 3 different ways, Kali. I would practice 1, no pedal at all, keeping things extremely legato, using purely finger legato. This means our cross of the thumb under on the way up, we have to really allow the wrist to be flexible, to bring the thumb to the key while we hold on to 3 in this case. So all of these, no pedal, but finger legato. Coming back down with the right hand is much easier. Yeah. Another thing you could try, but we want to be careful that we don't smack the thumb too hard, is if we don't lift, but let the wrist fall into the first note and let it rise over the course of the triplet, and then fall into the first note and let it rise over the course of the triplet. That can also help. And it's a great way of continuing to be sure, like we talked about with Ser Woolsley, that our wrist is staying in motion and not frozen. Yeah? Okay, so that's all finger legato. Second way, no pedal again. Can we practice slowly, allowing, in this case again, 3 to leave the key, and then thumb to play. So here, I'm keeping the rhythm perfectly steady, but I'm not attempting legato on the large leap. So at the end of the triad, right, and coming back down, same thing. Transitioning from 1 across. It's wherever the finger cross or the hand cross is going to be, the thumb tuck. Any of those things, okay? Then, number 3, we can put the sustain pedal down and practice a little bit because it'll sound beautiful. And we can practice hearing how, when we allow the hand to skip and not actually connect, that the tone still does connect. Because the faster and faster we need to play arpeggios, as we study more and more, the less time we have to make this large physical movement to actually use pure finger legato. So all of that, those, most of these notes, if I played what I just played without any pedal, it would be this. Yeah. It was all very light, and they were actually all disconnected. That's getting into more advanced technique than we need to talk about today, but those are 3 ways that I suggest practicing arpeggios, definitely. Bachward's Fellow, you said, are we regarding weight on keys? Okay. Holding all keys down and playing individual combinations of fingers. Yes. Yeah, absolutely, Kali. Let me know how that works, Kali. Feel free. Tune in again next time and tell us how your progress is going. So, yes, the playing of, let me see, holding down all keys and playing individual combinations of fingers, like, and then, yeah, 3, and then when we get to 4 and 5, that's especially more difficult. Jess, it was good to see you. Have a good dentist appointment. That could be something to do. Maybe can we modify, or let me suggest a modification to what Bachward's Fellow is mentioning about holding all keys. Maybe we can hold down 1 instead. Like if we're working on articulating the inside of the hand, thumb and 2, we could hold down 5 and feel 2, which would allow a little bit of rotation in the wrist. So holding 5, playing 1, playing 2, playing 3. And that doesn't risk the immense tension, especially when we need to play like 4 while we hold everything down, and 5, which requires kind of a lift of the finger. Because we don't want, some of those things are a little dangerous, right? As technique develops. That's a big reason why I'm not a fan, always a fan of the beginning of the Dachignani exercises and some of the Brahms exercises. Great. So, we had another question from Antonio earlier. By the way, if you're here and you haven't had a chance yet, could you please click the thumbs up button? It helps out a lot. Tells YouTube that you actually like what's happening here at the channel. Antonio said, talking about arpeggios, can you explain poco legato and the advantages of playing arpeggios without connecting the hand positions? Maybe did I just answer that question, Antonio, without even knowing that you asked it? I feel like I did, but let me reiterate one more time. The main advantage, as I see it in the moment right now, is that as we need to speed up or as we need to maintain fluidity, that we need to release and let the arm move. It needs to move very freely. If we're playing something like that, which is not a traditional arpeggio, but none of this is really going to be connected with finger legato. There's always pedal down. Yeah. So there's a more advanced application of that. Oh gosh, I'll mention one other thing really quickly, and that is, this is something I mentioned a few months ago on a stream. Many times, as we need to develop faster and faster virtuosic technique, there is an extreme focus on like legatissimo, or very, very light, more like leggiero even, very light, very, very light playing, where we still play to the bottom of the key, but we don't actually try to physically connect note to note to note, because there simply isn't time for it. And the music happens so fast when we have passages like that, that when we do try to connect things, it'll either become blurry and just a mess, or the physical connection will add tension that we simply can't afford to have. And not even bad tension in this case, just not allowing the hand to be as free moving, not allowing the wrist and the arm to be as free moving as they need to be to execute some very fast passage work at performance tempo. Almost all the time when something like that happens, the pedal is down. And in those cases, our job of creating legato line, smoothness of line, is making sure that our articulation and that our dynamic and sense of phrase matches from note to note. Not necessarily that the key press is physically connected from note to note. Great. Hector tuned in. I didn't get to say hello to Hector, but hello, Hector. I hope you're still here. Okay. Okay, great. I think we're all caught up. I don't think I missed anybody's question. Did I miss any questions? Beautiful. Oh, great, Hector. I'm glad you're still here. Thanks. Sparrow, did you have a question? I'm so sorry. Oh, I missed it. I didn't go back far enough. I'm sorry about that. Okay. Sparrow, I think this is your question about pedaling, right? In the beginning of your nocturne for the left-hand arpeggios, how not to make the sound muddled? Do you use half pedal like you just explained? I don't use half pedal in that nocturne, no. Sparrow, did you have a chance to watch the video that I posted? The title is "This Legato doesn't mean what you think it means," because half of that video is actually about pedaling. But it's not blurry because I'm incorporating, to sum it up, I'm incorporating finger pedaling with the use of the pedal. And this is something that I wish was taught a lot more often because it's really important in romantic repertoire. Oh, and you're talking about the nocturne I wrote. Huh. Well, let me see. Oh, I do not half pedal that. So I'll put a little bit of this up on the screen because this is not a familiar piece for most people. Okay, I wrote this piece, maybe 4 years ago. It's somewhat in the style of Chopin. So the beginning. It is purely pedal down for all of this. Other places, for example, what I just played in measure 7, the melody has what would be a lot of dissonant notes right at the beginning of the bar. And if we pedal down the whole time, that blurs together and we get the tritone, right? Which then turns into, okay, we hear that this is actually a diminished 7 that resolves. But that doesn't happen until the end of the bar. So if I want to keep that clean, I end up holding, I'll make it a little bigger so you can see, holding the notes in the left hand that I want to sustain. Same actually principle as in the Chopin, but extended just from one pitch. In the Chopin Opus 27 number 1, we're holding only the lowest pitch and then continuing off of it because the pedal can come down. In this case, I'm continuing to hold, for example, this pitch and this pitch and this one and that one, all of them with the pedal up. And then the pedal comes down here, where I need to leave thumb and cross either to 3 or to 2, something like that. And because of that, pedal's up and then down. So I can keep it up and clear, have a very clean melody, put it down. Now I don't have any of that blur from the C natural, which is a non-chord tone. So it's the same principle, but employed in over additional notes. There's actually a great deal of repertoire, not just, we looked at something I wrote, but there's a great deal of romantic repertoire that benefits from thinking about left-hand figures and sometimes right-hand harmonies that need to be sustained. Sometimes the composers give us a sustain, and they tell us, oh, X pitch needs to be held for 2 beats, even though the rest of the line, they're written in multiple voices. Sometimes, though, composers don't give us that, but if we employ some finger pedaling to aid the pedal, because we need to keep the overall pedal cleaner, it can really make more magic happen in the music than we might otherwise find. So you said when you do that in the first bars, it sounds off. Well, all of those, the pedal is purely down. This first bar where we get a movement of a second in the melody, I'm making sure that I don't catch the second, the dissonant note, the A flat in this case. I'm not catching that in the pedal, but I'm making sure that everything else that I want sustained, I'm finger pedaling throughout. Yeah. And Bunny, where can I find your nocturne? Mine, it's on my, it is on Music Notes, but if you would buy it off of my store, you spend the same amount of money, but I get a lot more of it. So if you go to my website, charlesstepanek.com, that also, I think the link for that is in the description below. There's a link in the top navigation bar that takes you to, it says, probably says store or sheet music or something like that. And you'll be able to find it on there. As well as, I don't know, some 50 or 60 other things, other original things, and some of my public domain arrangements are out there. Great. And Sparrow, thanks for reminding me. I'm so sorry that I missed your question. Raj is here. Hello, Raj. Dith, let's jump back to Dith's question. Or let's see, Nancy first. Nancy said, if a piece does not have pedal marks, should it be played with finger legato only? Not necessarily. That's the quick answer. And that depends on the level of music you're playing and the book that it's coming out of. So if we're working, let's say, earlier in a method book, earlier levels, level 1, 2, especially if it's prior to that, usually we're going to not use pedal. I start to encourage my private students to use pedal earlier rather than later, and when we have time to talk through individual use cases, we can really talk through why it works and why it doesn't, and we can incorporate it much more quickly than maybe the traditional book would allow us to. So if you have an in-person teacher, we want to talk about that on a case-by-case basis, because pedaling is it's an extremely complex topic. That's part of the reason you don't find a lot of videos online talking about how to pedal things, because one, it's greatly tied to interpretation, and two, the rules are, there are a handful of rules, but those rules get broken all the time. And so it really depends on what we're playing. So now, jumping forward, if we're playing a more advanced piece of music and there simply aren't any pedal marks, many composers did not write pedal marks in their scores because they assumed people playing their music would understand what the pedaling should be. If you have let's say a score from a great composer, one of the great composers, and it's no pedal except for a few bars, that does not mean don't pedal the rest of the piece except for the bars where it's marked. It actually means use traditional pedaling techniques for the opening or all of those measures where there aren't marks. And then the composer writes marks in the score because we're breaking tradition for those particular measures, and they want you to know that in particular. So they want you maybe to blur a harmony that you'd otherwise pedal. So I hope that makes sense. And if there are no marks at all, like a lot of text editions, there are no pedal markings because the composers did not write them in themselves. Sometimes you can buy scores of the same repertoire that are kind of like study scores, or the editor has marked their suggested pedaling. And that can be helpful, especially if you don't have a teacher you're working with. It can be helpful to have those suggestions, but also know that they are only that. They're only suggestions. And if you buy multiple editions or look up multiple editions online, you'll find that these suggestions change because, like I just mentioned, pedaling it's not always a cut and dry thing. Fingering suggestions change, pedaling suggestions change. And it depends on the editor and their preference of interpretation. So Nancy, did that answer that question for you? I'm trying to think if there's anything I missed. I would encourage you, if you're playing, if you're earlier in method books, I would encourage you to try using the pedal, and with the general understanding that we pedal with harmony. So where we put the pedal down is where, in general, we're playing the same harmony, and where we lift the pedal up is where the harmony changes. Okay, Bartok with no pedal marks. You're probably talking about the Mikrokosmos set. I don't have a copy of that handy with me. I would use pedal. I would use pedal where possible. With, of course, the understanding that in a composer like Bartok, and many of the other classical composers, we do not want to blur the sound too much. You know, if we're playing Debussy or something like that, the rules of pedaling change drastically. Okay. Yeah, Nancy, I would, that and the 10 easy pieces, Songs for Children, yeah. I would definitely encourage you to try pedaling and try to work it out. Write in your own markings. Gosh, I write a lot of music, like we just looked at a little bit of something I wrote, and I only ever write pedaling where it does not follow the norms, follow the tradition. And many pieces, sometimes I forget to write it, but it depends on who the kind of the level of the piece and who it's written for. But many times under bar 1, I'll write with pedal or con pedale, and that'll be the cue that says, well, we pedal the whole thing somehow. And sometimes if it's really advanced writing, I won't even write that marking because I will assume, like composers have in the past, that people are going to pedal it. But great question. Okay, jumping back. Dith's question. Dith says, you're having a problem with diligence and you're learning some pieces and you're about 95% there. Beginning at perfect seems to be taking forever. And the lack of progress is draining motivation. Oh, okay, so Dith. If we're playing music, and especially if it's for ourselves, but even if we're playing for or studying for certificates or, you know, progressing through the levels or playing recitals, the goal of music is never perfection. I think we live in an era where we're surrounded by musical perfection everywhere. You go online and you hear perfect performances. You open Spotify or Apple Music or whatever you listen to and you hear perfect performances. And gosh, even really great professional pianists play a recording session and they do not play things perfectly. What you don't see is all of the editing that happens behind the scenes. And I've done some of that professionally for people, so I've had firsthand experience. You know, a musician will want, I want the first beat of measure 4 from take 5, and I want the third beat from measure 4 from take 6, because I liked it. It was different. And sometimes at the highest levels, we're splicing like that for the sake of interpretation, but a lot of times, even with really fantastic players, an 8-hour recording session will be chock full of mistakes. But what you hear after all the work is done is perfection. And that makes it really hard to understand, one, that today we're expected to put out recordings that are perfect. If we don't, well, we'll get ripped apart. But think about, wasn't it Beethoven that said, I can't remember the quote exactly, but playing all the right notes is not what music is about. Playing all the right notes means nothing. Playing with intention and with musicality and with passion, I think that's what he said. That is what music's about. So I would rather hear, and I think Beethoven said this too, rather hear performance with mistakes that's passionate than a perfect performance that is bland and flat. Right? So that's the first thing. So just kind of help your sense of motivation. Know that, one, the point of music is not to be perfect, and two, the point is to move someone who's listening, to tell a story and to have an emotional impact, right? So if we're 95% of the way there with our notes and we're making an emotional impact, you're doing great work. Okay, the last little bit. So if we want to figure out how to achieve that last, oh, thanks, Raj. Raj got it perfect. To play a wrong note is insignificant, but play it without passion is a sin. I think that's, yep. But to play without passion is a sin. Absolutely. Thanks, Raj, for being able to, if you looked it up or you knew it from memory, beautiful. Okay, so now let's talk about that last 5% that you want to attain. Most of the time, there's going to be a very specific reason why we're missing something, even if we've done a tremendous amount of practice. Diagnosing that without hearing you is very difficult because it could be a style of practice. It could be there's an issue in practice somewhere, probably. But it could be a whole variety of things. It could be not enough practice to build endurance to play, for a course of a piece or however long you need to play. Not enough focus, like very precise focus on what we're doing and not letting our mind be distracted. This, now I'm not talking about like playing the notes, but just how we're thinking while we play. Or there could be more of a technical thing that maybe we have missed something in our practice that a specific technique will help unlock for us, and then it'll become more consistent. If your mistakes are always happening in the same place, we isolate those measures and we want to try to find what is causing the mistake to happen. Is it tension? Is it a leap that's uncomfortable? Is it something that we simply haven't dissected and spent enough time on the tiniest bit? Does it have to do with, in fact, something that came before that we get so focused on and then we lose focus where the mistake happens, where maybe that point isn't a difficult place to play, but the previous phrase was. And all of a sudden we've played the previous phrase well and our brain relaxes and then we make a mistake. But you can see as I'm going through all of these things, all of these ideas, that they're highly dependent on what you're playing and how you've practiced. So, Dith, can you send something in? I know I asked at the beginning of today if people get nervous, and a lot of people get nervous about that. But I feel like I can really be helpful in diagnosing some of those problems if I can really see what's going on. One more thing about this, and Raj said the 80-20 situation, and Dith, you said 95% there. The last few percent, or the last little bit, I have found in my experience, takes as much practice as the 95% took, or as much time practicing sometimes. Especially if we're pushing ourselves to the limit of our technical capability currently. We can learn a lot for 90% of our practice, or 90% of learning the piece. Let's say that takes a month. The next 10% might take 2 months or 3 months. And that's 100% normal. And that's hopefully just knowing that I also have experienced that same thing is a comfort to you, because the difference is I know to expect it when it happens. I know that, okay, I've gotten to X point, pieces memorized, I've got a couple of things to work on, I've gotten all of this done in, 200 hours of practice. Well, I need another 100 hours to now take it from where it is to like fail-safe in performance, where it's going to be so solid that I know it's going to be great. And it takes a lot of dedicated practice time, practicing the right way. So let that be a little bit of a comfort to know that when we do put a lot of time in, we do get to a point and we've kind of maximized what we do at that time, and then we get diminishing returns, and that the diminishing returns are not a problem with you, or they're not a problem. Sometimes they're not a problem with practicing. It's mainly an issue of continued repetition to really, really solidify what we're doing. And we can get that last 5% fastest if we employ all kinds of great habits and great practice techniques. But it always takes a lot of time. Except for some of the most brilliant prodigy pianists who've ever lived. And it's I don't know. I don't think it's really fair to compare mortals to people that are like that. I was actually just talking with someone yesterday morning kind of about that, and how some of the really, really brilliant pianists that tour, and that tour a lot, you know, you can name a ton of them, they, at this point, like, don't need to practice anymore because they are so brilliant and they are so gifted. They learn something and it's just there in their fingers. That is not typical for anyone. And that's why there are so few people in the world that are like a Yuja or like a Trifonov or like an Argerich. That's why they rise not just to greatness, but probably they will continue to be listened to for hundreds of years. Because they aren't just great, they are geniuses, really. So it's beautiful that we get to listen to music performed by people like that. But we need to know that our goals in music, let's make sure they're not, we can strive for greatness, and not always achieve it, but we can always keep leveling up, right? And to the point where we're going to be very, very satisfied, and probably even professionally, there'll be audiences that are very satisfied with our playing. I'm no Argerich or Yuja or Trifonov, but I have audiences tell me they love my performances all the time. But I definitely, music does not come as easily to me as it does to them. So, hello, Miguel. Great to see you. And Antonio says, even Argerich said it's very hard for her to perfect a piece. And I think, actually, the greater level you achieve, the harder it is to reach perfection, because we've learned so much that it's like the adage of the more you learn, the more you know, the more you know you don't know. All right. So, let's see, jumping back here. And Ser Woolsley, you said something similar. You have to just accept it's never going to be perfect, or accept that today you are where you are today, and that's good, and you've made progress. Gosh, even get a piece of notebook paper out for Dith as well, and Ser Woolsley too, since you brought this up. Write down, get in the habit of, at the end of your practice session, write down the good things that happened, because your practice session was probably full of them. But as humans, we have a habit of focusing on the handful of things that didn't go so well. Yeah. So if we just can think, I made it through measures 1 through 16, and it was the best day ever on those measures. Write that down. Even if we made a mistake in 17. Fine. We can keep a mental note about that, but celebrate what goes really well, because there's probably a lot. And jumping back, Bunny and Sparrow had some comments about the recording process that I was talking about. So Bunny said, are you saying one take was perfect? Are you saying it was edited to sound perfect? And Sparrow said, editing out false notes you can understand, but increasing speed, will that sound bad? So most of the time, we cannot increase the speed of a performance. It will more than something like 2%, and you'll very, very easily hear that it's been sped up or slowed down. But, so sometimes, again from experience, there are passages where the tempo has been slightly off from one take to the next take, and the engineer goes in and does tempo match. If it's got to be really close, though. Otherwise, yeah, you can't do that. Oh, last comment, nothing edited is perfect. Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it. And Bunny, yes, no, very often single takes are not perfect. That I have done recording sessions, edited albums for professional musicians where they literally spend 8 hours recording a single piece, like a sonata. And every take, in a sense, is very, very good, maybe great, but they're not perfect. And then, one movement, a 10-minute movement of a sonata might have 30 or 40 edits in it. That's totally normal. Yeah. It's very rare. There are more and more live albums coming out, but it's the great majority of professional pianists cannot do that live. They cannot play that perfectly live. And sometimes even, Horowitz has a famous example, very, very famous example. His, I think it was Carnegie Hall recital from the 60s. He released a live album of it and didn't tell anybody that he went back into the hall the day after his recital and replayed a bunch of stuff, and they edited it together to make this super brilliant recording. And the people that weren't there, which is most of the world, thought that's how he played live. And it wasn't, I think, until the 90s, late 90s, that the actual live recording, mistakes and all, which were plentiful, came out. But there is also a magic to his actually truly live performance, because he went for things in the moment, and sometimes they worked and it was beautiful, and sometimes they didn't, and you can respect him for pushing the envelope to its limit. Yeah. But that's a very famous example, and you can find both of those, the edited version and the unedited actual live version. You can find those online. Dale has a great point. You say, I record the piece I'm working on every few days and go back later to hear the progress. I think that's a great thing. I think that's a great thing to do. Yeah. As long as you can kind of keep space to keep all those recordings. And I've mentioned on the stream before, but I like to have my students record when we finish a piece. Let's say we've learned a lot from it, we're performing it well, yeah? We record the piece. They record it on their phone. It's nothing fancy, but the piece gets recorded and archived. 6 months or a year later, especially if they come to me with feeling like Dith felt earlier today, with like frustration and lack of motivation, we say, let's go back to the archive and pull out some of these recordings you did. Always, it's something that they were happy with a year ago. They're like, oh, wow, I hear all kinds of stuff that I missed. But it's a positive thing. We don't say, oh, that's not good enough anymore. We say, look at how much better you are today than you were 6 months ago. 6 months ago, you couldn't hear those mistakes. Mistakes not being wrong notes or wrong rhythms, but musical things. And now we're aware of them. That is all speaks to our development as musician, and that's really, really important. So if we can have records of that when we have those down moments we can go back to, that can be really great. And it can also motivate us to get back out there and practice again. And Bachwar's fellow said there are so many different ways to play a piece perfectly, and that's very true. And which one is the perfect one? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Awesome. I think we've gotten through all of the questions. No, maybe. Let me see. Raj earlier said, I feel like pedaling is best refined by using one's ear as a guide, kind of feeling things out over time and having some general concepts. I would agree with that, going back to the pedaling topic. Absolutely. Ear is the best guide to pedaling. Ser Woolsley, you had a, let's see, trying to find it. Oh, and Hector has a question too. Ser Woolsley, I see, on the comment about the very last rolled chord, I went to re-listen to the recording by Seymour Bernstein, and you feel like it's pretty sudden. I'd have to refresh exactly how he plays the end of that. But Ser Woolsley, I would caution you against only using one artist's interpretation to structure yours off of. I would fill your ears with can you find 3 or 4 that you can get behind and that resonate with you? They're all going to be different. Seymour's is great. But I would look for others as well. Because like we were just talking about, the one way isn't necessarily the way. And in fact, how Seymour plays it, probably from day to day, is not the same way. And so, yeah, it's really difficult to know if he strongly accented something because he felt a particular way about the phrase in that moment, on that day. There might be a certain magic in the phrase that helps it work. And if we don't know where his brain was and where the previous phrase was coming from inside him, we're not going to be able to represent the outcome or the next bar. We're not going to be able to represent it nearly as well as he does, right? That's always the issue with listening to others' recordings of music, because we should, but we don't want to get locked into only interpreting something one way in particular. Okay, and back to Hector's question. Sorry, Hector, for taking so long. Here we go. Hector's question was, what's your approach for bringing back a piece, particularly a difficult one, if you played it decades ago and you've since forgotten it? And you're in particular working on Chopin's Third Scherzo. Okay. So, have you not played it at all for decades, for 10, 20 years or something like that? Or have you kind of dabbled in it here and there? Have you played it every few months, just for fun, anything like that? Okay, so you say you've dabbled a little bit. If you haven't let it completely go, where you haven't played the notes at all, it's going to come back faster. And if you haven't, let me just touch on that real quick. If there's something you learned that you never bring back, again, it's going to feel almost very, very close to like learning it again. If it's been, gosh, even a couple years from your first learning it, and then you try to play it again, there's probably going to be very, very little recollection. But the more even if you don't do significant work on it, but especially if you do, but even if you just play a little bit here and there and play a little bit here and there, every few months, or probably at minimum every few months, until we do that for a few years, things are going to come back much, much faster. So, the first thing I would do, especially if you've performed a piece before, is go straight to the places that were the most troublesome. And you know exactly what those are because of either how something went in a performance or how you had to work on it leading up to a performance. If you didn't perform the piece, how you still have a great idea of where those places are. How, which bars in particular, and go straight to those. So coda, particularly the left hand. So, and can you narrow that down even more? What about the left hand? What bars in particular were the hardest? Start to dial those in, and resist the temptation to start to go quickly. Sometimes when we're bringing a piece back, we can achieve kind of relative proficiency with the notes soon, much sooner than if we were learning something completely from scratch. But it's really important because we're still, if it's been a while, we're building new neural connections as we practice. So it's really important, even if we feel like we could go faster, that we resist that and we don't allow ourselves to do that. And we practice easily. We practice very slowly. You said some of it may be age. You're 63 and things seem more difficult. Yeah. Yeah. The way the brain works changes a little bit over time. But especially if it's not something new. it's not going to be as difficult, right? So, oh gosh, your technique has probably also changed. And hopefully for the better, right? We always hope that as time goes on that we become better players. But if you've taken a break for a long time, your technique is still different than it was before. Okay, so because of that, we might also need to incorporate different practice techniques than we needed earlier, or that we needed when we first learned the piece. So those are my biggest pieces of advice are: one, resist the temptation to go faster, especially in bits that you think you know, because you're going to reach that point of feeling comfortable pretty quickly. And secondly, look for all of the as specific measures, notes as possible, and look for where those problem areas were and dive into those very hard. Spend the majority of your practice time, great majority, like 90% of your practice time on those measures. Because chances are they're still going to be the most difficult ones for you. And some of the rest of the piece is going to come back much more easily. And third little bit of advice: how quickly, especially if you had a piece memorized previously, how quickly can you get back out of the score and not looking at it? And it doesn't have to be in massive chunks, but yeah, we shouldn't be. Don't let yourself, work your way near performance tempo or something like that before we close the book or turn our iPad off or something like that. Make sure that we are we're getting those notes really back in our ear and back in our mind, so that we don't have to be looking at the score but can focus on the movements instead. And focusing on that as soon as possible, you might find that the memory, if you challenge yourself to close the score, you might find that the memory actually starts to come back much faster than if you play and repeat and repeat and repeat while we watch. The memory isn't going to, if we're not focused on it, the memory is only going to start to be rebuilt by muscle memory. But I bet we can achieve it much faster if we challenge ourselves a little bit. And speaking of that, still memorize below tempo. Hector, I hope that helps. That's a bit of the process that I go through, and I bring back music, and I have to perform it. Gosh, yeah, great. I'm glad it helps a little bit, Hector. Let us know how your Chopin third scherzo goes. Yeah, I'd love to hear it. I'm sure other people here on the channel would love to hear it too. Kali had a question here. Any words on of how to stay motivated and not give up? Think about why are you playing music in the first place? And yeah, what does it mean for you, and why are you doing it? If we you can either answer that in the chat or you can answer it to yourself. Either way is fine. But for most people, it's going to be, we are playing music to enjoy it. We're playing music to experience it and to enjoy it. And if that's the case, remind yourself of that during your practice time. Practice time isn't a time that we sit down, and its purpose isn't to, woodshed and dissect repertoire, and we can do that, of course, and we can do that to get better. But the main purpose is to make sure that we enjoy our practice time. And I find that can be the most motivating thing if we shift our thinking back to why are we playing the piano in the first place. And if you have a lot of really difficult rep that you're working on, sometimes that can be a cause of like lack of motivation or getting frustrated. Pick out some couple easier things, whether you're like very, very much working on them on a daily basis or not. Pick out some things just to play for fun. Something that I like to do is the brief moments that I get at the piano that are purely for enjoyment, I improvise a little bit. Because I don't have to put any music up. I'm not really thinking about, I'm thinking in a way, but it's almost subconscious. I'm just making music. I'm doing something. And it's not usually like a very classical in style. And that's okay, because I enjoy a lot of other music too. So I might take 2 minutes or 5 minutes and I'll improvise something. And that can make me feel so much better. And something that some of you have heard before, one of my teachers, I came into a lesson when I was a teenager and expressed a sentiment like that to my teacher. And he told me, practicing is like climbing a sand dune. Sand dune, every step up, every 2 steps up, you're falling backwards. And you can tell you're working very hard, and it doesn't look like you're making progress as you're climbing this. But as long as we keep stepping forward, 1 foot after the other, and just keep that focus, right, we will reach the top. If we stop because we get frustrated, well, what's going to happen is we're just going to slide back down and we have to start over again. So don't stop. Don't stop. Think about taking a little break from your repertoire, from your main focus, as like almost more like treading water. We're not going to be traveling further, right? But we are going to be staying afloat, and we're going to be feeling safe, let's say. Yeah. Whereas if we're here to change the analogy over to swimming now, if we are swimming and we're working hard, we're going to get tired out at a certain point. We're going to need a break. Yeah. But if we know how to pace ourselves and we know where we need to pause, just tread water for a little bit, then keep on going. That can be huge. Let's see. That was Kali's question. That's some of my advice for you there. Ser Woolsley had a question. There's one more thing I think I want to mention about that, but let me answer Ser Woolsley's question, and then I'll tell a quick story, and we'll probably wrap up for today. Ser Woolsley said, would you know why some of the older pianists curl their pinky all the way down, especially in fast scales? It is probably not a technique they were taught. It's probably a tension. Some people I've seen and read a couple things that, if the pinky's curled and it launches out, you can get a lot of power that way without actually lifting the finger up. But the curl in is still tension. It's tension in the hand. And there is a difference between, sometimes it can look very curled, but it's actually just very relaxed. So there's a difference between those. If the pinky's all the way in and kind of touching the underside of the hand, well, that's not a natural hand position. I don't offhand know if the famous teachers of the time, if Horowitz's teacher, for example, taught technique that way. I don't know that in particular. I know from reading all of the technique books that I've read and going through things, there are no approaches to the piano that ask for that to be done. So it's not something that I think we should attempt to model. But what I usually tell students is if we have tension in the 5th finger, and if it's curling in and not lifting up, we can work around that. We can strive to release it, sure, but there's a tremendous amount of rep we can play, and Horowitz is a fine example of, virtuosity not being held back by a curled 5th finger. If we get to a point where it causes a problem, well, we need to work on relaxing it, or work on why is the curl happening and how is the release happening, and is it truly benefiting our playing? So yeah, that's my opinion on that. I think, in fact, if you watch some of my own playing, I curl in a little bit with fifth finger occasionally, depending on what the passage is doing. And I haven't had a problem, and no teacher has had to rid my technique of it, let's say. And Hector says you have the opposite problem, hyperextending it. I also have a problem hyperextending the last knuckle of 5 in my hand in particular, where it doesn't happen as much anymore because I've changed my approach to playing, especially chords and octaves, where I'm more centered over the big knuckle. And so the hyperextension in the last joint doesn't happen. But there was a time where my fifth finger would curl in and I'd put a tremendous amount of force through it and the last joint would collapse. And man, after 4 hours of doing that in a day, my fifth finger would be very sore. So it's something I'm very aware of with students now if I see that happening. Most of the time, though, it's actually the other problem. It's fingers bending backwards at the final joint, not hyperextending. One way you can alleviate some of that with 5 is to make sure that if we have good alignment with the wrist and we're really standing on our top knuckle, that we can move and we can really stand on the top of that finger. And it can be very strong then. The only struggle that remains is when we can't stand on it, that we don't allow it to hyperextend, kind of like what I just did here. But that we keep it nice and firm. So that could be an approach. Rotate the wrist around to 5. Feel a very, very strong big knuckle where the bridge is, and make sure we feel that. And usually, if we bring the wrist up some, we can feel that very, very well. Okay? Okay, last bit before we wrap up today. I had a little story I wanted to tell, and this is going back to Kali's question. If you're subscribed to my email list, you might know this already. Oh, Antonio's question. Let me answer that first because this is a quick answer, and then I'll tell my story. 432 tuning for piano solo. On a digital, it's interesting. It bothers my ears because I can hear 432 sounds out of tune to me. It doesn't sound right. A is not A. Chords are not where they're supposed to be. There's some science kind of floating around about how lower tunings might be more relaxing to listen to or soothing, especially used in therapy and things like that. I'm not 100% sure if that's true. Second answer to that question, I would never, ever, ever tune an acoustic instrument down to 432 because acoustic pianos are built and they're designed around a very specific amount of tension on the pins, across the bridge, on the plate, and you know that the rim is all holding together for us. When that is 8 hertz is a tremendous change in tension over the entire instrument, and what will happen is you will cause all kinds of other tuning problems that don't normally exist to crop up on an acoustic piano. So the scale design, the length of string after the termination point, that's all a part of why things are, of how the piano works and resonates at 440. So if it shifts by 8 hertz, the extra speaking length, the duplex scaling, is going to sound probably a little funky. Or we're going to lose a lot of resonance because it won't speak at all because it's no longer resonating, period, because the tension isn't correct. So those are 2 quick answers about that in particular. Digitals, if you can deal with the detuned nature of it, then sure, experiment with it and it can be fine. Personally, I can't always do that. It sounds flat and out of tune. Great, Ser Woolsley. I'm glad to hear that shift for you. Okay, last thing. Going back to it was Kali's previous question, and so if you have subscribed to my email list, you might already be aware of some of this story because I share it in there. But I'm going to tell you about the darkest moment I ever had as a musician and what I did to get out of it. So here we go. At the end of my master's degree program, I was playing a huge program of stuff. The Liszt Sonata was on it. The Liszt Petrarch sonnets were on it. I think Les Adieux, Beethoven Les Adieux was on it, and a couple other preludes by Paul Arant. I think that was the whole program. And I had just come off of, this is kind of actually tying everything together, I had come off of my first album project. So I was, 23, 24 years old. And I went through the whole process of making an album absolutely like as perfect as I could possibly make it. And I was recording some pretty big rep. It was signed on a label. I felt a lot of pressure. And then after that, it all got finished up and I had this really, I'm still happy with it today and proud of it. I had a great representation of my playing on CD. And I started learning some new rep for my next program, the Liszt and everything else I just mentioned. And I got so in my head that I had to be album perfect every time I played in front of anybody. Every time when I played in front of my professor, I had to be album perfect. When I played in studio class, it had to be perfect. And I put this immense pressure on myself. And I even started saying things like, well, if I'm not that good, as good as I was on the album, then like why am I bothering doing any of this? What's the point? And it led to a really bad place where slowly, like, my technique started failing. I started increasing my tension at the piano because I was making a problem for myself. And so my technique started going bad. I was thinking about so many other things that my memory started going, my memorization. I couldn't keep, the exposition and the recapitulation separate from one another in a sonata. So I'd go around a repeat somewhere, and then I'd accidentally start the piece over again. And then I'd have no way of getting back. Really, really strange things started happening because I created anxiety. I created my own world of anxiety. To the point where I actually played my last recital. It went okay. I got through it. And I thought, I don't know if I'm ever going to do this again. Because it was so hard. Thankfully, fast forward a year or two, and I had a couple people in my life who were very supportive, and I started writing my own music, and it was really writing my own music that got me back into playing and teaching and everything. Just experiencing music again from a very different perspective. And over the course of then, performing that music slowly over time, and then incorporating, playing classical music again and collaborating with others and doing other things. Everything came back, but it was years. It was like 4 years between that horrible moment and actually feeling like I could do this again. And so recording is dangerous. And putting high demands on yourself is very dangerous. And so I would, anybody who's feeling frustrated, that's why I say, figure out why are we playing in the first place? What does it do for you? Why does it make you happy? Why did it make you happy? Let's find those feelings again. And always take time to play things that you enjoy. So, there's my story. And we'll wrap it up for today. So always, thank you to everybody for being here. And as always, remember that you can submit a video of yourself playing if you'd like to. Directions for that are in the description below. Thanks, Antonio, Sparrow, Jose, all three of you. You've been here the whole time. Ser Woolsley, Bachward's fellow, brilliant. Thanks everybody else for tuning in. We do these every 2 weeks, except the next 2 weeks. So we don't have a stream next Wednesday the 30th, and we don't have a stream on September 6th. So the next stream is September 13th. For me in the morning, because I'm in Colorado in the USA, and hopefully all of you who tune in, you know what time it is for you. So, awesome. Thanks so much to everybody for being here. Remember to practice smarter, not harder, like we always do. And I will see you next time. All right, have a great rest of your day or rest of your evening, and see you in a couple weeks.